All right, everyone. It is 1 p.m. Central Time, and we are ready to get going. Thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day today to just spend some time learning. We try to do these monthly. Lately, we've been doing them twice a month, as there's been just lots of questions and lots of interest in learning more about how you can improve your online fundraising, especially at a time when a lot of people are taking their in-person events and flipping them into virtual events and finding new ways to reach their donors online. It's never been more important to figure out, what strategies and ideas really work and what don't work. And so, again, just grateful for your time. I'm the marketing director here at NextAfter, and it's my pleasure every month to come on these webinars and be able to help you get access to some of these new ideas. So before I hand things over to Tim to jump into all the insights that he's pulled out for you, I want to point you to a couple of resources and cover some housekeeping things. So number one, I assume you're here likely because you've been to this page already, nextafter.com/coronavirus, but some of you may not have seen it, depending on where you came in from. We have this tool, which is kind of the key driver of a lot of the insights that Tim has pulled out for you today. So our CTO, Kevin Peters, has built a super cool dashboard looking at 156 nonprofits, and they're monitoring their email volume over the course of this pandemic season, and really this year so far. And there's a separate dashboard in there looking at web traffic, tying into 90 organizations' Google Analytics, where you can actually see real response rates and trends and what you can expect on your website. So there's tons of data, and what Tim has done today is synthesize a lot of the key insights to help you find some new ideas that you can test in your messaging and in your tactics and strategies right now. So again, you can check out that full tool, dive into all the dashboards and the data yourself, nextafter.com/coronavirus. Now, many of you have asked, this is the answer. A video recording is going to be coming to your inbox later this evening around 5 p.m. Central Time. So we're recording this right now. I'll also be able to share the slides with you and any featured resources that we've mentioned throughout the webinar today. So you'll have links to all of that stuff. So if you missed something, you can always go back and rewatch it. You can also share it with a colleague if they have another meeting or something going on right now too. And then third and finally, we have time for question and answer today. So at the very end of the presentation, we'll have about 10 minutes, and typically we just go as long as there are questions. To ask questions of Tim, he'll give you some answers. So all along the way today, if you have ideas or thoughts, comments, questions, use that same chat box that's on the right side of your screen that you've been using to sound off as to where you're tuning in from. Use that to share all your questions throughout. Now, I promised Bart Sherwood that I would give him a shout out. I don't see him in the chat, but I promised it. So Bart, there's your shout out. Welcome to the webinar. I'm going to turn it over to Tim Kachuriak, who is today's speaker. He's our founder of NextAfter. He's the Chief Innovation and Optimization Officer. Super smart marketer, has a ton of insights and experience into the nonprofit fundraising world, specifically online. Kind of a champion of A/B testing and experimentation and research in your online fundraising. So you might actually recognize Tim better from this picture if you had been to the NEO Summit this past year. Tim, you want to put that picture up? Or are you a little shy on sharing it? There we go. There we go. So
Nathan, you're going to have to reactivate my video. It says my video's been stopped by the host.
Well, I'll turn you on here. Well, I'm going to turn things over to Tim to take it away. So let's see. Let's turn your video on. All right, you should be able to turn it on.
Okay.
Here we go. I see that face mask. This is a very socially distant webinar.
Is this safe? Is it safe? Can I take it off? Okay.
I think it's safe, but maybe at a great precaution.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Nathan, thanks for a wonderful introduction. And we're going to get into this material. I've got a lot of content. It's going to be coming pretty rapidly. But as Nathan mentioned, everything will be made available to you after today's call. But before I get into the content, I actually really just want to address every single person on the call today. And I want to ask you a really serious personal question. I want to ask, how many of you are experiencing something like this, where every day you wake up and you find yourself trapped in a familiar reality? You're not going anywhere. Nobody is. And no matter how hard you try, no matter how many lengths you go to, you can't change your current situation. And for some of us, this may be bringing us to the brink of madness. And for some of us, we may even slip over the edge. Like, me when my kids get me to do crazy, cowboy dances on TikTok. But the joke's actually really on them, because I'm actually saving this video for my audition video for Thunder from Down Under, just in case the whole fundraising optimization thing doesn't work out. And for those of you who know what that is, feel free to laugh. And for those of you who don't, please, please, please do not Google it. Okay. Well, I do like to laugh. I think that, everybody handles stress differently. And for me, I've been spending a lot of time on LinkedIn. There's a lot of funny stuff going on there. But all of this stuff that we're experiencing is going to pass. This too shall pass. And we may even look back at some point and even romanticize it a bit. We might even see that this has opened up a pretty interesting opportunity for us to maybe go through a transformation, either personally or professionally. But we'll come back to more of that later. So let's go ahead and get into the topic today. So this is the question that we want to try to answer. How should we approach fundraising amid COVID-19? And so in order to answer this question, I want to address two secondary questions. The first one is this: what are other nonprofits doing? Maybe some of you have been asking this question. What is everyone else doing? What are my peers doing during this time? How are they communicating with their donors? And the second question is, how are donors responding? Are they still giving? Are we seeing a downturn in giving? And so if you know anything about NextAfter and our research, you know that we do these forensic research studies. And what we do is we'll go out, we'll subscribe to hundreds of different nonprofit organizations at the same time. We'll monitor everything they send us. We'll analyze it, all the pieces of correspondence, every email, every text message, every voicemail. We've got boxes and boxes of direct mail stacked up in our storage locker. And we analyze the pieces of correspondence. We wait for these organizations to ask us to make a financial gift. And when they do, we'll give a mystery gift as small as $20, as large as $5,000. And then we monitor how these charities change the way they communicate with us as we've crossed from being a casual visitor to subscriber to donor. And as you can imagine, it is absolutely fascinating. If you haven't had a chance to go check out some of our studies. But what this enables us to do, because we're subscribed to all these organizations' stuff, we've constructed this aggregate donor inbox where I have hundreds of different organizations that we're constantly monitoring various different email communications. And so, as Nathan mentioned, when this whole coronavirus thing really started to cripple business and started to affect the work that we do in fundraising, I asked Kevin if we could put together a series of resources that could help answer some of these questions that everybody was wrestling with. And so as you know, we mentioned, you can go in, you can analyze the volume of communications, you can see what different types of messages are being sent. You can even go in and click through various different messages. So what I want to do is use this data set to try to answer this first question as to what are other nonprofits doing. So just to kind of frame up what this data set looks like, there's 156 organizations that we're monitoring. And the data we're looking at today is between January 1st of 2020 and April 15th of 2020. So basically the first 3.5 months of the year. And of the 156 organizations, there was 12 different verticals represented, and we analyzed 2,889 pieces of email correspondence, and that's continuing to grow over time. So it is being updated in real time. And you can see the various different verticals: arts and culture, education, environment, faith-based, foundations, health, human services, international, public policy, public media, public societal benefit, and wildlife and animal welfare. So looking at this data set, the first thing I want to point out is that what we've seen from January 1st to April 15th is a steady increase in email send volume week over week. So if you look at this chart here, this orange line, this is what the total email volume is from these organizations that we're tracking. And if you notice right here around March, when everything started to kind of, really go into lockdown, that's when we actually see almost an acceleration in the volume of emails that are being sent. So if we go and dig in a little bit deeper and say, okay, well, what different types of verticals are sending the most messages? So international is the top sender right now, followed by public policy and public media. And then you can see human services, environment, and education are in the middle, and then foundations and public societal benefit, arts and culture are on the smaller end of the scale. But if you look at this data and you compare it month over month, for all but 3 different verticals, we're seeing actually an increase in volume of messaging. So to answer the one question, are nonprofits still communicating with their donors? Yes, and increasing frequency. And so if we go and dig in a little deeper as to the type of messages or the purpose of the messages that are being sent, we can see that 47% of all the messages that have been sent this year thus far has been solicitations, so appeals, asks for money. Another 45% are cultivation engagement content, and then 7.5% is newsletter. And if we look at this week over week, which is what the chart on the right illustrates, although the volume of messages has gone up, we have not seen a real difference or variance in the composition of the different types of messages that are being sent. What this suggests to me is that for most nonprofit organizations, they have not altered their strategy as to the type of communication mix that they're putting out there. They're just sending more of them. Digging in a little deeper, taking that same table and then starting to break it apart, I want to point out a couple of things. There's several organizations that are sending significantly more solicitations than any other type of message. At the top of the list here is international organizations. So the green bar represents solicitation, blue is newsletter, and gray is cultivation and engagement content. Public policy is number 2, environment, health, human services. And so you can see that some organizations are sending more, and it's probably logical that these 5 verticals are sending more appeals now than any other type of message, because in some way they're probably directly involved with some of the relief efforts or some of the legislation efforts or some of the other health related efforts around this time. So the next question we wanted to dig into is, are nonprofit organizations, are they talking about COVID-19? Are they mentioning coronavirus or the word pandemic in their communications? So if we go back and look from March 1st or from January 1st to March 1st, we can see that virtually nobody is talking about COVID-19. Nobody's talking about coronavirus. And then fast forward a month, so from March 1st forward, we can see that almost 59% of all communications, whether that's a solicitation, an engagement piece, or a newsletter, and it's mentioning COVID-19, coronavirus, or pandemic in some way. When you look at this over time, so if we kind of plot this week over week or week by week, what we see is the mention of COVID-19 is occurring with greater frequency. So as of last week, 73% of all messages sent are mentioning coronavirus, pandemic, or COVID-19 in some way. So the question that we started to ask ourselves when we first started looking at this data, is it advisable to mention COVID-19 in your email appeals or in any type of appeal, online appeal? And so I've got 3 different experiments queued up where we've tested different ways of actually doing this with some of our research partners. And then I also went back and I pulled out of the aggregate donor inbox 3 different examples from other organizations that seem to follow one of these 3 different approaches. So let's look at the first one. This first one comes from Americans for Prosperity. And this is a donation landing page. This is a page that you would see immediately after signing an open letter. So in other words, a petition to Congress, petitioning them to make certain types of moves as it relates to legislation around the CARES Act, which is directly involved in providing relief efforts for businesses and for hospitals and other organizations that are going through this crisis. So this first version of the page, after somebody signs the petition, they're presented with this page. This first version just goes into the standard value proposition for the organization. It doesn't really mention anything specifically about how the dollars are going to be used specifically for the CARES Act. Version B, so the alternative, the treatment, actually takes a different approach, and all of the content, all of the copy really reinforces how the dollars that are given to this campaign are specifically going to be used for the purposes of advocating for certain legislation within the CARES Act. So we ran an A/B split test. Version A is on the left, version B is on the right. And the COVID-19 relevant ask had a 37% increase in donations. So if you look at that, you'd say, wow, that probably means I need to consider included COVID-19 in my appeals. Well, let's look at a couple other examples. So this is another example. This is an email appeal for the Heritage Foundation. This is part of their membership drive that went through the end of March. And the standard membership appeal that goes out to both prospects and house fowl alike goes like this. your membership is overdue or your membership has expired, please renew your membership with the Heritage Foundation today by making your tax-deductible gift. So it's a pretty straightforward ask. It's a membership, give a gift and renew your membership appeal. And by the way, this is a campaign that they run every single year around the same time. So in the treatment, they tried to add some relevance by talking specifically about COVID-19 and trying to almost like shoehorn that issue into what is really a standard offer. And when they did that, what we found is it didn't work. It actually produced an 81% decrease in donations. Now, I have to point out that this is a little bit of a messy test because there's multiple variables going on. So the COVID-19 is not an isolated variable. It's coupled with a different sender, as you can see at the bottom. On the left, it's signed by Maggie Smith. On the right, it's Tommy. So there's multiple variables going on, but we can't help but think that the COVID-19 is at least one of the factors that is trying to almost be jammed into this appeal, and it didn't really work. It didn't resonate. It didn't connect. So let's look at another test. This is a donation page test for CaringBridge. And if you're not familiar with CaringBridge, they provide free websites for people that are going through different kind of health journeys, whether they're recovering or going through cancer treatment, and they can use these websites to stay in contact with friends and family at the time, you know, they need that support more than ever. So you can see that here's the standard ask. It's, you know, help Kelly stay connected to her family and friends. A $30 donation will keep Kelly's CaringBridge website active for 1 month. So in this treatment, there's a subtle kind of nod to the crisis we're going through. They don't specifically call it out by name, and they don't really belabor the point. They just add this subtle little kind of almost like an aside. In times like these, staying connected online is even more essential than ever. That's why a $30 donation to CaringBridge helps keep Kelly's site alive for 1 month. So you can see they don't really go headlong into it. They don't really try to make a strong connection, but it's you know, a very subtle mention. And after testing this for a period of time and several 100,000 different samples in the test, we were not able to discern a statistically significant difference between the control and the treatment. So it was an inconclusive test. So if we look at these 3 different experiments, these 3 different examples, you can almost derive 3 different strategies or different approaches that you may consider testing or taking with your communications. So the first one, remember, they connected the gift directly to the legislative work they're doing on the CARES Act. So it's a very relevant ask. It's probably a very natural approach. And so this is probably something, if you're doing work that's directly related to some of the relief efforts or to addressing the crisis in some way, it probably makes sense to include it in your appeal. The second version, remember, this is the one where we kind of tried to shoehorn this relevant topic into a standard type of ask, and it felt forced. It didn't really connect. It didn't make sense, and it wasn't necessary. And in fact, it actually led to a negative response. So that's kind of like another approach that you could take, and it's probably not advisable. Now, of course, everything should be tested. That's why each of these different examples exists, is because they ran the experiment. They wanted to understand. But this is probably an example of something you may not want to try. And then the third example, where there's just kind of a subtle nod. It's not overt. It's more subtle. It's more of a neutral type of approach. Well, as we could solve from this example, it didn't really make that big of a difference. So let me go into our aggregate donor inbox, and I'm going to pull out 3 separate emails that we received in the last couple of days. And each of these, I think, as we walk through them together, you'll see how each one has adopted one of these 3 different strategies. So the first one is an emergency appeal for food for the poor. I'll let you see the full email, scroll from the top to the bottom, kind of standard format here. And if you start to like illuminate some of the copy, it's like, I know you may be feeling overwhelmed right now. Everything is happening around the coronavirus pandemic. It's crazy. And oh, by the way, we had to shut down our food service operation because, you know, we couldn't serve hot meals anymore. So now we're like packaging up stuff. We're trying to deliver it to people. But, you know, families are confined at home. Schools are closed. Factories are closed. And if we don't act now, people are not going to get what they really need. And it could get worse. Will you please consider giving a gift today? Well, here is an organization that is directly kind of engulfed in the crisis. They're doing something to pivot, to move around that obstacle. So this is probably a great example of a very natural type of appeal that's bringing COVID-19 into their fundraising. So let's look at another example. This one comes from Sierra Club. So you can see here's the full email. We'll go from top to bottom, come back up to the top here. And you can see that, probably the theme of this email is Earth Day. It says Earth Day goal, help us meet our Earth Day goal up there at the top. But in the first couple of lines, they kind of try to stuff in some COVID-19. We're all figuring out how to navigate COVID-19 pandemic. And then it kind of goes hard stop into like Earth Day appeal. So it's almost like very disconnected. It's hard to kind of figure out why that's really being mentioned. So this probably is an example of, really that forced type of model where you're trying to stuff it in to an existing appeal and it doesn't really connect. Earth Day is something that happens every year, the same time of the year. And so trying to stuff COVID-19 into this probably doesn't make sense. And we'll look at one more example. This one comes from Greenpeace. You can again see the full email from top to bottom. And, it's relevant to Earth Day. And it's really about like, how do we get rid of plastic that's, polluting the environment, and how can we make some changes in ourselves and our consumer behaviors to make sure that, we can rid the world of things that are really destroying the environment. And there's this kind of subtle nod in the second paragraph. I want to challenge us to use this fierce solidarity, right? So what they're saying is like, look, we're all going through this together. This is a great opportunity for you to stop, to contemplate, what kind of changes do I want to make in my life? And how can I, make a commitment now, where I'm kind of out of my day-to-day hustle bustle, and make a commitment to do something about this problem. And so this is probably a great example of that kind of neutral type of thing. They don't fully, try to connect it to COVID-19, but they're saying use this time, which is a time of great solidarity to consider changes you want to make. So let me give you the application, okay? Mentioning COVID-19 in solicitations may only help if your work is directly related to the current crisis. If you try to stuff it in, it's probably going to have a negative effect. If you just kind of give a subtle nod, it probably won't make much of a difference. But if you're doing something that's directly relevant, it's probably a good idea to make that connection as well as you possibly can. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the second question, which is probably even a more burning question for most of us. How are donors responding during this time? What do their behaviors look like? So to answer this question, I'm looking at a completely different data set. So this is from an online fundraising benchmarking project that we're working on. We had an open call for organizations to participate in this study. And to do so, they would connect their Google Analytics data so that we could actually go and monitor that activity. We had 90 organizations that participated from 10 different verticals. And from January 1st to April 15th, we were able to analyze 198 million visitors. And we're able to look at revenue data of about $46 million. Now, I want to give you a few caveats about this data set because I think it's important to understand what we're looking at here and not make any false assumptions. The first one is this. Because this was an open call for research partners to participate in this project, we have inconsistent representation of the various nonprofit verticals. So if you look across the spectrum here, you can see we don't have the same number sample size in each of these different vertical buckets. When we do our mystery donor studies, where we get to pick and choose the organizations, every single vertical has the exact same number so that we can kind of get some consistency there. But in this case, you can see it's weighted to certain types of organizations that were more apt to respond to this offer to participate. So that's important to understand. The second thing, and this one's also very important, e-commerce tracking data, reliable e-commerce tracking data was only available for about 43% of the organizations that participated in the study. So the revenue data, when I get to that part, just understand that that's underreported. And it's only representing less than half of the organizations in this study, okay? And then the final point is that April is a partial month. So we were looking at this data through April 15th, making comparisons year over year from April 2019 to April 2020. We're gonna see some pretty significant discrepancies because the month of April in 2020 has not been complete yet. So I tried to exclude that for all intents and purposes for this analysis today. But let's go ahead and look at some of the web traffic trends. So one bright spot right away, overall web traffic for the year, so from January 1st to April 15th is up, 3.2% year over year for the organizations participating in the study. So that's good news. I mean, obviously, you can't get donations unless you get visitors to the website. So if we go and try to connect this data set to the other data set where we're talking more about email communications, how's email traffic doing? Well, what we see is for the quarter, so January, February, and March, email traffic is up slightly. So it was 1.3% for the quarter. You can see February was a significantly down month in terms of email traffic. I don't know why that is. Probably take some more digging. But for the month of March, which is really when the coronavirus communications really started to ramp up, there's actually a 12% increase in email traffic. So traffic from people that are clicking on links in emails sent from nonprofit organizations that lead to their website. So you can look at this also, kind of by organization. You can see not every single organization has seen positive gains in the month of March from email traffic. But for the most part, they have. So the most organizations are seeing increases in traffic, and some to very high numbers, 1,000%, 600%, 500%. So some pretty significant differences there if we look at this, year over year. So the question we should ask is, well, why is that? Why are we seeing such a higher volume of email traffic? Well, if you remember, when we looked at the email data, I told you that nonprofit organizations are sending more emails. They're increasing their email send volume. So surely by the fact that there's more emails going into people's inboxes, that creates greater opportunity for people to open and to click on messages. But another way you could explain this is by saying, look, because most of us are in shelter in place type of situations, we are kind of locked into home offices. We're not on airplanes. We're not driving, down the freeway. We're not, in and out of meetings every day if we're not in front of a computer screen. So this gives us greater possible opportunity to open emails. So, email as a medium is kind of a pretty exciting time right now. And, Nathan asked a great question the other day on Slack, on our internal Slack channel. He said, I got an email from somebody. They're wondering if we're seeing any significant shifts in, response rates for email during this pandemic. Like, are we seeing any increases in opens, clicks, or, response rates for emails? So several folks from the client teams chimed in. Kristen said, yeah, I had a client that had very high clicks with content that seemed to really speak to their FAO. Courtney said, yeah, I had a client whose email engagement has increased even as we increase the volume of messages that we've been sending this past month. Greg says, my COVID-19 emails for another client were most highly opened, clicked, and responded to emails in the last 12 months. And then Jeff shared some data from a campaign that was running from March through April. And I don't know if you could see the numbers there, but like the open rates and click-through rates are significantly higher, at least for what this organization typically receives. So 52% open rates and nearly 6% click-through rates for appeals. So that's some anecdotal stuff to kind of add some color to some of the data that we're seeing. So although traffic is up, one of the observations is that engagement on the web is down. Okay, and so what do we mean by engagement? Well, we have a number of different metrics we can measure. There's bounce rate. So does somebody go into a page and immediately back out? Average time on site, how long are they spending on the website? Average pages per session. So you can see those are all slightly down. And we typically will take those three metrics and we'll blend them together to create an aggregate engagement index. And what that does is it enables us to plot this as a single metric. And so you can see this chart here, although it is slightly down for the year, we're not seeing a real significant shift. And this could be explained a number of different ways. Frankly, engagement metrics can be they could be very misleading, right? So if you have like kind of a main donation page or an email landing page that's only one way in, one way out, then that could, deflate some of your pages per session, but that doesn't mean that people aren't giving. And you can see if we kind of break this down by vertical, some verticals are seeing higher engagement, some are seeing less. But that's probably another study for another time. But let's go talk about revenue for a second. As I mentioned, I don't have revenue data for every single organization that participated. So instead of 10 verticals, there's only 8 represented in the data that I have because only 43% of organizations have that. So I don't have 90 organizations with revenue data. I've got 39. And then instead of 198 million visitors, we only have 107 million. But across those 8 verticals, those 39 organizations that had 107 million visits, we were able to track $46.28 million in revenue. And if we look at this year over year, what we see is that the overall revenue is up 13%, which is excellent and very encouraging, I think, to many of us. And so again, this is online revenue. I'm not talking about events. So maybe there's some substitutionary giving taking place, but online revenue is up 13%. If we look at the total donations, January, February were pretty flat year over year. But if we look at March, check out March, 11.2% increase in the number of gifts. So we saw an increase in the number of donations made online in the month of March. But even though donations are up in March, we're seeing that average gift is actually down. And it's down 14% in March. So what this means is people are giving more gifts, or more people are giving, but they're giving in lesser amounts. And if we look at donation conversion, which is really an efficiency metric. So, donation conversion is if I have 100 visitors to my website, how many of those people actually go through the process of making a complete valid transaction? How many people give a gift? And what's really interesting is that every single month, if we compare it year over year, January, February, and March, we see a higher donation conversion rate. So how can you use these three metrics? This is a great model for you to think about. So we use this model all the time. We call this the Flux capacitor of revenue maximization. There's three primary metrics that affect revenue. It's traffic, it's conversion rate, and it's average gift. And each of these metrics has the same exact impact on revenue. So if you can optimize one and the other two remain the same, you're getting gains in revenue. If you optimize two at the same time, you're exponentially growing your gains. If you can move all three at the same time, you can significantly grow revenue. So let's look at how these metrics stack up for the year. Traffic year over year for this data set is up 4%. Conversion is up 6.5%. Average gift is slightly down. It's almost basically flat. If you look at it year over year, it's down 0.3%. So if you take these three metrics and multiply them together, that's how you get your 13%. So just to kind of summarize, and then we're going to kind of move into some question and answer time. The first question we ask is, what are other nonprofit organizations doing? How are they reacting? How are they engaging with their donors? Well, for all intents and purposes, from the data that we've been able to analyze, is that nonprofits are still fundraising. They have not stopped sending appeals. In fact, it seems that the frequency and the volume of messages they're sending to their donors has done nothing but increase during this time. And the second thing is, at least based off our data set, our limited data set, I'll give it that, is that, donors are still giving. We're seeing increases in revenue year over year. We're seeing increases in conversion rate. We're seeing increases in the number of gifts. The average gift numbers are down a little bit, but we are seeing, positive elements there. So before I kind of close and open things up for questions, let me go back to Groundhog Day, because I said, maybe this is an opportunity. I don't know if you have all seen the movie, but Phil, who's a local weatherman, has to go cover Groundhog Day in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. And he kind of wakes up and every single day is the same. He gets stuck in Groundhog Day. And at first, he's bewildered. He's like, this is the strangest thing ever. And then he moves to frustration. And then, frustration gives way to anger and then despair. And then something happens, something shifts, something changes. Despair gives way to revelation. Maybe this isn't a curse. Maybe this is a blessing. And he starts to then reimagine and reinvent himself. He starts to say, how can I become the very best version of myself? And so I think that that's a great thing for us to think about, together during this time. Maybe, I know that there's lots of suffering, and I know that this is a terrible thing, and I know nobody wishes that it lasts another second. But how do we use this time? Do we get down? Do we wallow? Or do we use this as an opportunity to reinvent our organizations, to go headlong, maybe into digital or to some of these areas that we've never gone before? So as Nathan mentioned, you can go and explore more. We've got lots of resources that can help. But hopefully this is encouraging to you, and looking forward to some of your questions. Nathan, back to you.
Tim, that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just watching some comments and questions and things coming in here in the chat. I don't know if you can see that in front of you, but a lot of people in agreement with you. This is 100% Groundhog Day. So definitely feeling that. And then Tim Ainley, just in the comments, just saying like, wow, isn't it beautiful that crisis is leading to more gifts and more people giving? And it's, yeah, There's definitely tragedy and all the hard parts of this, but some really beautiful things that are coming out of it too, like people responding to those in need. So things like that are exciting and some nice silver linings that we see. A couple things before we jump right into questions. I'm going to share a couple resources with you, but while I'm sharing these, use the chat box on the right side to ask your questions. There's already been several in there. We've got a good lineup of Q&A questions, but if you have more, put them in that chat box for sure. We'll try to get to them. As our gift to you right now, if you've been on a webinar before, you've probably seen this the past couple webinars just during March and April, we've been giving this away. But if you're new, I want to give you a free online fundraising course. So we have about 8 courses now in our online learning platform, spanning kind of the gamut of online fundraising. And we're always trying to develop new things, but there's a brand new course on Google Analytics. There's courses on email fundraising, donation pages, testing, copywriting, and a whole bunch of stuff. So if you go to courses.nextafter.com, use the code LearnFromHomeTry, you can get one of these certification courses for free. You only get one, and you have to use the code by May 1st. If you want one of these courses, use the code by May 1st. And if you want to actually dive deeper, you can jump to the next slide if you would, Tim. If you want to dive deeper, you can actually become a member of the NextAfter Institute and get access to every single course, every certification course, plus a bunch of other perks like access to new research early, discounts to in-person workshops when we have in-person workshops again, things like that. You can check out all the details, nextafter.com/membership. And again, you can use the code LearnFromHomeJoin to save 50% during this time when we're all kind of trapped at home or working remotely. Now, there's a lot of questions. Tim, I'm going to just jump right in here and cue you up with one of these. So a question right off the top. I sent a message over to Kevin to see if he had any ideas. I haven't heard from him yet, but maybe you know. Do you know what vertical we would place a public library in within those dashboards?
Most likely public societal benefit.
Okay, that's what my gut said too. And Sandy, I'll try to confirm that with Kevin here. But that's probably the best place to look for something comparable to a public library.
And actually, that brings up a really good point. And this is one of the ways that you could maybe use some of that data. You can go into that data that we walked through today, and you can start filtering it by vertical or by type of communication, whether it's an appeal, does it mention COVID, does it not mention COVID, and you can really drill down and then use that as a way to kind of, do a little competitive research, right? Just compare yourself to other organizations like yourself and just see, you might get some ideas of ways that you might, reuse some of that stuff. So that's a great way to use that.
Yeah, it's a cool tool. A couple questions are pretty similar, so I'll kind of combine them together. One from Jean and one from Carol. And Jean says, would you consider it like forced messaging if you're addressing an increased demand for your nonprofit services and your reduced revenues at the same time? Carol's asking something similar, saying, is it too forced to say that we've lost 95% of our earned income because people can't attend our events? Are those forcing messaging, or is that qualified?
I would say that that's very relevant. I think that that's very natural. You are directly being impacted and affected by the fact that people can't, maybe come in your doors or come to your events or, attend your concerts. So I think that I think that's a very valid reason, saying, look, this has really crippled us and we need you now more than ever. We've been there for you during all these times, and now we really need you. And people respond. I've been just absolutely overwhelmed at just the miracle of generosity unfolding. I feel like people right now, they need to have something that all of our nonprofits can provide them that they can't get anywhere else, which is like, hope and impacts and, something that they can do to contribute to making something different, because we're very powerless right now. And this gives them an opportunity to do something with power. So that's a great opportunity. For sure. Thank you. Question from Mandy, wondering if you have any insights into this. She's wondering if we have any data on she says, what types of content are performing better right now, but then says, for example, like email versus something like Facebook or Instagram. Any insights that you've seen into like different channels and how they're performing? Is it just email that's up, or is it kind of everything? Yeah, I think digital as a global channel, we're seeing increases across the board. And I think it's really directly related to the fact that everybody is wired in. I mean, the number of people that are using Zoom meetings now, what was the number? It's like increased from 100 million users to like, 600 million users in 30 days.
It's crazy.
Like I've got my parents, they didn't even know how to like turn on, the computer. And now they're like doing Zoom meetings with their family, which is amazing. So yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. The innovation that's happening, even just with like new tools that are now out there to like play games over the internet with your family and friends and things like that. Like, yeah, it's just really fun. Here's another question from Allison. And there's a couple similar questions to this. So Allison's wondering, like, so we're seeing more gifts, but at lower amounts. Do you or do we in the data have any sense of how this will change over time? For example, we've been in lockdown for 6 weeks, but if this continues for another 6 weeks, any sense of this maintaining, increasing, decreasing?
I mean, I think what we're seeing is that we're seeing less major gifts come through than we have in the past. And so if you go back and look historically during times of economic downturn, the major gifts that they're giving in lower amounts just because they don't feel as wealthy as they had in the past. During those times, usually like the smaller gifts, so like sub $1,000 tends to remain fairly consistent. So I think that that's what we're seeing in this trend. I don't have enough data to be able to validate that, but that's most likely what's occurring here.
Yeah. Here's another question. I know we're not monitoring this directly, but maybe you've seen some things kind of anecdotally in the email examples that you've looked at. But Katie's wondering, have we seen a shift in mentions of the CARES Act specifically and tax deductions in emails?
Yeah, I saw that pop up. I think that's a brilliant insight, and that's something we can definitely add to our analysis. So that great call on that. I think we'll probably add that as another filter.
Yeah, it should be
simple to do. You just optimized our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. We owe you one. That's super helpful. Let's see. And now I'm just scrolling. There's a bunch of questions that came in even just as you were ending. So we got a lot. Question from Raquel. Should we implement with the strategy of this, should we implement I'm sorry, I'm trying to make sense of this. I think she's asking, should we implement a giving day? Is something like that effective right now? I know we have the Giving Tuesday Now, Giving Day coming up. Thoughts on those right now?
Yeah. I mean, look, everybody's wired in. There's going to be increased kind of like, global understanding about giving because of all the resources that are going into Giving Tuesday Now. So I would not shy away. I would not sit that one out by any means. I mean, I think this is a great window of opportunity. I'm very grateful for the folks at Giving Tuesday for, having vision and pulling this together. I know that we don't have a lot of time to prepare, but I would do something. And it could be as simple as maybe a series of like 1 to 2 or 3 messages that you send, maybe the night before and maybe the 2 of the day of. But yeah, definitely don't sit this one out.
Yeah, it's a good word. Question from Sanchi Partida. Hey, Sanchi. Let's see. She's asking about subject lines. If we've seen anything, about should you leverage positive messaging around COVID-19? Should you leverage negative messaging around it?
Wow. I mean, Nathan, where are we getting all these folks? That's a brilliant insight. That's another thing that we could probably do. In fact, what I could probably do is like pull all the subject lines down and like do a word cloud and then do like a sentiment analysis of each one. So you've just given me more homework now. Thank you.
Shout out to Sanchi, who was one of our award winners at NEO Summit a couple years ago. And she's showing why. She's got great questions, great insights. Let's see. Another question from Mandy. What types of content are doing better right now? Not just channels, but like anything between like videos or sharing stories, graphical based stuff, pictures.
Yeah, I don't have anything specific for you. I can tell you this. Historically speaking, when we send emails with lots of graphics, lots of images, like for appeals versus plain text type of email messages and appeals, we tend to get much higher response rate for the plain text. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first one's a technical reason. So when Google and Gmail and all these different mail service providers, they see an email that comes through with lots of HTML and graphics and images and coding, they're like, oh, this is somebody trying to market to somebody. Let's go put that in the promotions tab. So it doesn't get into the inbox as often as something that's more plain text. So the second reason, and this is something that kind of goes to our mantra of people give to people, if people truly give to people, when somebody sees something that's like all flashy and got lots of images and graphics, I mean, they may be interested in the content and the material. They may love your organization, but they also, like, at first glance, they're feeling like they're being marketed to. And people don't want to be marketed to, they want to be communicated with. So sometimes scraping away that marketing veneer, getting rid of images, getting rid of graphics, getting rid of buttons, and writing the email plain text with the link, obviously, so that people can give. But like, as you would write from one friend to another friend, we've had such tremendous success with that, not just during COVID, but all the time. So that would be at least one way to address your question.
Cool. Thanks, Tim. Question from Claire. This is interesting. Is there a noticeable difference between using the term coronavirus versus COVID-19? I know we're tracking those both, but I don't know if we can really tell difference in performance.
Yeah, we have them all kind of pulled into one filter. I actually was thinking the same thing myself. I'd like to know the answer to that question. I wonder even if like Google Trends would have some information on that. But that's a great question, and let me get back to you.
Just kind of anecdotally, just as I was putting the template together for that dashboard page, I just jumped in Google Trends and was looking at searches for coronavirus versus COVID-19. And so the reason that header on that page says coronavirus is because that was like the more larger search trend, but it's possible that's changed over time too.
I feel like it's shifted. I've been hearing COVID a lot more frequently than coronavirus, maybe because it's easier to say, less syllables.
I don't know. Takes up less space on a banner too, which is why it's the title of this webinar. There's the science behind that. This is funny. Heather sharing that she now sets her alarm for a different time every day, so she doesn't fall into a Groundhog Day situation.
Brilliant. Life hack number 64. Set your alarm clock for a different time every day.
I love it. Optimization or fundraising optimization, life optimization. You get it all here. Let's see. Jen says, debate is raging whether we set up a designated fund for COVID-19, but what I'm worried is that we'll end up with monies in a fund we can't actually spend in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I avoid the dedicated funds like the plague. So I mean, if you can set it up so that this is one of several things that your money goes towards, and make it general, general gift, that would be ideal, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. I'm not sure how to pronounce this, so apologies if I don't get it right. Franca, I'm not quite sure, is asking kind of a similar question to what we talked about a few minutes ago. There's often a disaster bump where giving eventually falls back off. Any thoughts on, since we're facing hard times, when that drop off will happen? And it may be too early to really have any idea.
I don't know. It's an excellent point. It's something I've been thinking a lot about. So typically what happens is nonprofit industry lags behind the for-profit, space. And so, just seeing all the things that are happening with businesses, and I think that we should expect that, we are going to see things start to plateau and probably start to go down for a period of time, for sure, especially with like people, losing jobs and the economic uncertainty ahead of us. Yeah, it's something that we'll have to continue to monitor, but unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball to look into, or else I'd have a better answer.
Seems like we have as close to a crystal ball as we can with this data set, but always optimizing that too. Question from Bill. Again, the data shows donors are still giving, but he's wondering, can we see that is money going specifically to organizations that are actually making a direct impact, or is it really an increase across like all verticals?
Yeah, great question. And that's where my incomplete data set, I've got, very inconsistent representation of the different verticals. I wouldn't be able to tell you that yes or no. So okay. Unfortunately, I don't know. I knew and anecdotally, just like talking to, first responders, international organizations, or relief organizations, they are experiencing significantly, booming times right now from a fundraising standpoint. I know that some, other groups are kind of, like arts and culture. I mean, this is like really a very difficult time. So it really does vary, and I just don't have enough data to answer that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Let's see, a question from Whitney. And you talk about this some, but asking specifically about email design. Do you have any feedback on email design? They've gone to less formatted, more simple designs. But some of the examples that they even saw just today were very designed. So do you lay into design? Do you pull back? And you talked about the some, but maybe to reiterate.
Like I mentioned, the more stuff you got in your email that looks like marketing, the more chances you will have to find yourself in the promotions tab versus the inbox. So just from a technical reason, yes. And some of those other, organizations' emails I pulled up, I mean, those are not groups that we worked with. So I didn't have any opportunity to test with them. So it'd be really interesting to see if they've been able to find a balance between graphic and copy. But as a general rule, I think less is definitely more, at least from all the different experiments that we've run. And we could probably even send out some tests from our library, Nathan, that address that specific issue. It sounds like that's come up several times.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, we can do that. A question from Raquel, just simply about what vertical they might fall into. So their organization deals with like female empowerment. Any thoughts on what vertical that would fall into?
It's probably human services.
Okay.
We have health and human services broken out. Sometimes, people join them, but we haven't broken out. So it's probably in there.
Gotcha. Hopefully that's helpful, Raquel, to dive into. Nancy is wondering if we can actually share any cultivation or engagement messages. Any examples of what's a good cultivating email or cultivating content right now?
Well, yeah, and just to reiterate, the entire aggregate donor inbox from January 1st to up through what's today, Nathan, the 23rd.
Yeah.
In counting, all of those emails are available on the website. So you can go in there and you can go and sort the data by say, just give me cultivation engagement emails, and it'll just list them all, and you can click on them and you can open them up and you can look at them. So you can explore that probably at nauseum.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see, question from Tim. As people get fatigued with living their lives through computers, as I think we probably all are getting to that point, do you anticipate a saturation point where people will stop engaging because there's a heightened amount of emails? It doesn't seem like we've seen that yet.
No, we haven't. It's a great question. I mean, I think, this is just pure anecdote and just speaking personally, but like I kind of go through like fits and starts, but I do know, I will tell you that I've been a lot more active on LinkedIn recently because like I don't have, I can't go hang out with folks. I can't, I usually spend a lot of time on airplanes and I meet lots of people and I like to talk. And so I'm finding that is kind of like my source to fill that, that need to have some sort of socialization. So I don't see that falling off. I do see burnout probably coming, because there's other studies I'm sure that are, go into detail about how that can occur, when people are constantly wired in all the time. But yeah, I think it's something probably we should monitor.
Yeah. Another question from Whitney. She's got a couple in here, but let's look at this one. So they've had to cancel some events, close thrift stores, and some other things like that, but they offer mental health services for children who've been exposed to trauma. And these people are actually very vulnerable during the crisis. She's asking specifically, like, what's the call to action? And I think maybe wondering, like, is it okay to ask specifically for donations to that at this time? Maybe is that too forced, or is that, an appropriate donation ask?
So it's a here. Let me answer it by sharing what I've seen some other organizations do. So, for example, I was talking to this this organization. They are trying to solve the homelessness problem, right? So, like, how would you solve that? Well, you build houses for people. So that's what they do. They go and they build houses for people that don't have houses. Well, a lot of their work is international, and when the whole pandemic thing happened, like all of their building literally shut down, completely done. They can't go to work anymore. So they can't actually deliver against their mission in their current form. But what they did is very quickly they pivoted. They said, okay, how do we address this issue of homelessness in a different way? so many people are losing jobs. They're losing income, which means that more and more people may be on the brink of moving to become homeless. So they went and they identified vulnerable communities, and they identified, areas where people were kind of in that situation. And now what they're doing is they're providing their resources to provide rent relief and providing like actual financial assistance for these people that are on the brink of being homeless. So I don't know if that exactly is applicable to you, but it might be something, again, this may be an opportunity to, find a different way to achieve your mission. And that may mean some type of virtual things. I know we've done stuff with some groups that, they had lots of events, and we said, look, let's turn them into online courses. Let's turn it into, other types of ways where people can still connect even though they're socially distant. So I don't know if that's exactly helpful, but maybe there's a kernel of an idea in there.
Yeah, hopefully so. And I've got Courtney, one of our team members, slacking me with some ideas here too. And she just said, all caps, telehealth. Like, can they use something like telehealth and like kind of virtual conferencing to offer those type of services? Lots of organizations are doing that right now. And she says maybe the ask is around the fact that there's such a rise in counseling services and that the need is greater than ever. So between all that, Whitney, maybe there's a couple little ideas to try out and to test. Another question, a little bit different. Do we have any insights on direct mail right now? I know we don't have a dashboard for it, but any data you've seen around direct mail response?
I didn't, and I don't know where I saw it, but we don't have it. So that's an easy one. But I did see that, and that's actually, Nathan, we should make a note and maybe try and dig that up and add it as a link on the resource page.
Yeah, that would be really good. It'd be really good.
And if anyone has any or knows where it is, please email us and let us know. That'd be great. Actually, that goes for all resources around this topic. If you could just let us know, we'll add those to the website, make them available to others.
Definitely. All right. This is the last question from Whitney. She's wondering, do we have any sense, I mean, with the donations that are coming in, do we see new donors or is this like repeat donors that are giving?
I haven't analyzed that yet. Okay. Anecdotally, for groups that we're working with that are doing acquisition, they are seeing lots of new donors come in. So that's okay. That's anecdotal, but that's not based off of that data set that we looked at.
Sure. I said this on the last webinar that there was the most questions we had probably ever gotten on the webinar, but I think this one has beat last month's webinar or last week's webinar. So it's kind of amazing. There's still a bunch we can go through here. I know it's almost at the 2 o'clock mark, but if you're around, we're going to just keep rolling through these questions as long as we have them. So stick around, we'll try to answer them. Let's see, a question from Jenny. Are you specifically discouraging appeals whose work does not relate directly to COVID-19?
Oh, not at all. No. Please hear me. I'm not saying do not do appeals. I'm saying I wouldn't try to force the COVID-19, which is, on everybody's mind, into your appeal if it doesn't make sense. So yes, keep fundraising. And yeah. We're seeing, like I said, if you go through a lot of those inboxes, you'll see a lot of solicitations that have zero mention of COVID-19. Yeah,
it's good clarification.
Yep.
Let's see, what else we got? A question from Chanel. Do you expect to have a similar webinar next month with updated information on new returning donors? At the moment, we don't have a plan for another webinar, although if we see lots of changes in the trends and things like that, we may very well do one. What you can do is you can go to that same resource we've mentioned. If you go to nextafter.com/coronavirus, you can actually sign up to get updates. So actually tomorrow we're sending out our very first weekly update. Tim's written a blog, and then we'll share this recording with everyone who's signed up. But we'll have these weekly updates on new insights from the data trends, as well as new experimentation and learnings that we're seeing. So Chanel, you can sign up there, and then you'll be on the list to get any and all updates around COVID-19 online fundraising. Let's see, Tim Ainley. It's just kind of a comment, not a question. Let's see, any more questions in here? I'm just scrolling through now because lots more keep coming in. Here is a kind of an in-depth question from Elizabeth. So let's see what's in here. She says, our homeless transitional housing campus with access to other partner providers is scheduled to open early 2021. So opening a new facility in 2021. Providers are now seeking more support, but since we're in a quiet phase of a capital campaign, but we aren't quote unquote open yet, what would you recommend with going forward? So any thoughts on like how to push through in some type of like big capital campaign at the moment, especially when we know that major donations maybe aren't quite at the level that they used to be?
Yeah, gosh, that's a really good, it's a great question. I honestly, I can't give you a good answer because I really have, I think I've been involved in one capital campaign and it was like as a donor. So I know there's a very, very exact science to how those campaigns run. And I think I would do malpractice if I tried to get response. But I'm trying to think of who we might know that would know the answer to
Yeah.
that question. Yeah, let me think about that. Maybe we can get back to them with a response, Nathan.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I don't see your last name in here, so it's hard for me to find your email address. But if you shoot me an email, just nathan@nextafter.com with that same question, we'll go and we'll try to find a resource that might be of help or someone who you might be able to chat with about that. So again, yes, just shoot me an email and we'll try to find a solution. And again, if you're new and this is your first webinar, you're quickly finding out that we're trying to be as transparent as we can. We have the data to give insights in some things, but we don't want to provide an idea and say that this works for sure when we don't really know. We're in the camp of we want to test it and see what really works and let the data speak for itself. Let's see, will there be another webinar? We'll just talk about that. You can sign up for updates on the resource page. And oh, here's a comment from Steve around the same type of topic. He says, we actually did a major donor direct mail campaign, sounds like recently, and it's been amazing. So some people are seeing results. It's anecdotal, but interesting. Toby's wondering if the info that we have is based on purchased email lists or some more specific, like targeted member email lists. How do we actually build this email list we're monitoring?
Well, the inbox is the way that we're getting all the emails from nonprofits. We went and gave gifts to those organizations. So we are basically simulating the donor experience for, a small dollar donor. I think we gave $25 or $30 gifts. Mm-hmm. So that's what that side is coming from. On the revenue side, the email traffic and email revenue data, that is just anything that's tagged within Google as coming from an email. So I don't know specifically if it's a rented email or if it's a house file email. It just has email as a UTM parameter.
That makes sense. Let's see, kind of a last question that we have here from Susan. She's wondering, and it sounds like she's talking more about social media. Any thoughts on how often they should be posting? Sounds like they work related to healthcare, addressing the crisis, talking about frontline workers. Should you be talking about this every week? Should it be every day? Should it be once a month? Thoughts on just like the cultivation cycle?
Ooh, Julia Campbell. That's the first name that popped into my head. That's a great question for her. I don't know. We do lots of social media advertising, but very little organic stuff. But I know Julia is like the master, so maybe we could connect her to them.
Sure. Yeah. So you can search for Julia Campbell, and get some insights there. That's all the questions that we have. If you have any last ones, get them in quick here. But Tim, any parting words for everyone as we now go back to the daily grind of working from your home office desk and trying to fundraise?
Well, I just, I'm an optimist. And so, I always try to find the silver lining in everything. And, it's been an ongoing daily battle for me just to try to find that. But, the fact that you're here today, that you're showing interest and you're asking great questions and you're trying to find ways to really, navigate through this suggests that you haven't given up, you haven't lost hope. And my encouragement is just to keep going. And, we've got lots of resources, as Nathan mentioned, but if we can help in any way, just reach out. That's really our primary mission. Yes, we're a business. Yes, we have to do stuff and we have to make money like everybody else. But, we try to focus on erring on the side of generosity, and that just means helping as many people as we can. So thanks for coming today. Thanks for your great questions, and hope to see you on one of these in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.